Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Wendy Dillard here. Today is Wednesday, March 28th, 2018, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, your second daily dose of happy for the day. And I hope things are happy for you, Wendy. It's been an interesting week, to say the least. It's been a good week, actually, in most ways. Had a few challenges with last night's show, but all in all, it was a good one because we had a caller. And she had great news about how she's been manifesting stuff with the law of attraction. So, things are good.
So what I'm hearing is that she's lining up with the way law of attraction operates, and that's how she's doing her manifestations. Because remember, you can't use it.
Well, that's
it's
true.
It's not like you turn it on and off. You either line up with how it works or you don't.
Well, see, now you just spoiled the final surprise. I thought she was flipping a light switch.
Nope, doesn't work that way.
Oh, dear. Oh, well. But it was great because, the last time that she and I talked was when she and Louise and I and her significant other Shane all got together. And since that time, the way she was talking last night, let me tell you, Wendy, she has been growing by leaps and bounds. Her confidence level in getting herself into alignment and putting out bold requests and expecting them to show up is just phenomenal. So I gave her credit last night, but I want to give her another shout out today. Lucy, you're doing great.
That's so awesome. When somebody can recognize what it is that they need to do personally to be able to get themselves in alignment with how law of attraction operates and, get their broadcast signals moving in the direction of what they desire, that's always a big thing. So, yay. I'll throw in my kudos to you, too, Lucy.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, well, it's a great job. If you had a chance to listen to the podcast, except for the little technical difficulties. She and Tom went great. I could have just backed up, gone to bed or something, but they were doing great. It was wonderful. So, how you doing? Anything new? Any updates for us or anything like that?
A little update, but every update is still, something in motion. Yesterday I reported that I was feeling a sense of peacefulness, which was something that had never been present
which is
with
nice.
Project X.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt really great. And after the show, I kind of just thought about that just a little bit, not any huge length of time, but I just kind of gave myself my own personal acknowledgement of, I'm in a state of peaceful and this feels good. And I noticed after that, I started getting, I want to say not content, but acceptance. I'm having a greater level of acceptance for where I am in the process of Project X manifesting, feeling more comfortable in knowing it's on its way, and that if there's any part that is yet for me to play in it, in terms of action, I absolutely know that I will receive the impulse and I'll follow it. And in the meantime, everything's on track. So that's where I'm at today. Everything's on track.
Well, shoot, that's a good report. That's progress, and it's a good feeling place. So what more could you ask for?
Mm-hmm. So that's very cool. Very cool.
Very cool indeed.
Pleased. Yeah, I'm very pleased.
So, Cindy and I this morning were talking about the fact that Wednesday is often called Hump Day, and I was asking her if she ever thinks of it as Hump Day, and she said she didn't. I don't really think of it as Hump Day anymore. I think it's partly because we're both self-employed. You're or you're partially self-employed. You're employed by somebody else, but you're employed at home. And if you're somebody who is out in the workplace, you probably still think about it as Hump Day, but you don't think about it that way, do you?
No, but it's funny because one of my dear friends, she has a radio show on Wednesdays, and she always celebrates Hump Day. For her, that's an exciting day.
Oh, well, that's good.
Went, wow, that's a very different perception.
That is good. I like that.
I look at every day of the week as just another day in the week, and even the weekends, it's like I do different things, whether it's a weekday or a weekend, but all days are good.
Well, plus even the way most people look at it as Hump Day is a small form of relief. So from that perspective, even the traditional perspective has at least some value because there's relief going on there. Now, do they need to do more relieving? Yeah, but hey, relief is relief. That's the way I see it anyway. So we are currently looking at A subsection of the law of attraction, the basics of the teachings of Abraham. We are on a subject or a subsection called "How Am I Getting What I'm Getting?" And when I was looking at that title today, I saw that first word "how," and my immediate reaction was, well, this isn't going to be good because "how" is never a good word to use when talking about law of attraction. As far as I can see, it's always something that gets you into trouble.
Oh, well, so let's start out there. That has my curiosity up. What is it about the word "how" that gets you kind of ruffled?
Well, for instance, if you are trying to attract something and then you wonder how it's going to work, you're undermining yourself. You're basically, you're trying to dissect it and get in the middle, and in doing so, you're expressing some level of doubt. So that alone is not a good thing. Plus, law of attraction tends to bring things in ways.
Hold on. I think that's a presumption. That maybe when you think of the word "how," you think you're undermining yourself. When I use the word "how," I am curious. I'm in a state of learning. I'm in a state of asking. So there are times I use the word "how" very purposefully, and it's a very good word for me.
Okay, I'll buy into that. That there are times when you can be using the word in a way that's good for you. I can see that. I do still have a little suspicion that there is what do we call it? Sort of a slight drag effect. Not major resistance, but a slight drag effect anytime "how" comes into it. Not that there's anything wrong with trying to understand how something works, because I love understanding this stuff. That's one of the reasons I do the podcast. But I've also come to realize there is a drag there. There's a little bit of a resistance. Well, that's the way I'm seeing it anyway. So we can beg to differ on it. That's all right.
Okay. Well, remember, words are just words. There's no morality. There's no good. There's no bad. It's what meaning we assign to them that gives them resistance or non-resistance.
This is true. Yep. Yeah, it's like George Carlin said, you can spell your name Smith and pronounce it Janofsky if you really want to.
There you go. There you go. So look, just set the record straight that I'm looking at the title, "How Am I Getting What I'm Getting?" as neutral.
Okay.
Okay.
I will say one other thing about neutral. And that is,
okay.
I believe that neutral is actually negative. Or more precisely, neutral is actually non-preferred. And the reason I say that is it's not preferred. It's just neutral.
See, now, I look at neutral. I love how we're playing point counterpoint already. It's early in the show. I look at neutral as a space of where there's no negative charge. In NLP terms and in other transformational modality terms, coming to a state of neutral means that you have taken the negative charge on something or the resistance on something and have completely demolished that to the point that you only feel, it doesn't even have to be positive. You feel neutral. You feel the non-negative charge. The negative charge is now gone. So that to me is a state of neutral, which is a good, I think a pleasant place to be, a preferred place to be. For me, if I've had a rough go at something, and let's say I've had a real tenacious relationship with somebody, and I have a lot of negative charge on it, and there's a lot of resistance, and I've done some personal work to reframe the circumstances, to view it from a different point of view, where all of a sudden I no longer see things from that negative slant that I had previously. And now I come into connection with that same person, and it's not like all of a sudden we kissed and like hugged on one another, but we were in the same room and there was like no negative anything that occurred. I call that neutral.
And I would call that improvement. And improvement is always good. I mean, that's basically incrementally working your way up the emotional guidance system scale. So that's a good thing. But
remember, from revenge to disappointment is improvement.
It is.
But it's still it's still not neutral.
Right.
There's still a drag. There's still a resistant aspect to it.
And similarly, neutral is not preferred. I mean, I try to stay away from negative and positive these days. So for me, it's preferred or not preferred. And neutral is not preferred.
If you're in your car and you have your car in neutral, are you moving forward, backward, or standing still?
Well, it depends on whether you're standing, you're sitting on a hill. But if you're on a flat level ground, and the wheels were not previously turning, then you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, you're not in reverse, and you're not in forward. You're in neutral.
Yeah.
You're in a non-forward or backward place.
Yep.
That's kind of how I think about it in terms of emotion. It's once you've worked on something and it no longer has the negative charge. The truth is it really does have a positive charge, but if you're not experiencing something big and overt, you may not think of it that way. It's kind of neutral.
No, I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think it does have a positive charge. And by positive charge, I mean a preference. It is not something to be preferred. The only way that I can see preferring neutral is if I'm coming previous to that from a non-preferred place. In that case, neutral.
But that was the illustration I was using.
In that case, it isn't really. Let me finish my statement. In that case, it isn't really preferred. It's just no longer in the not preferred. I definitely don't want to be there state. It's like halfway between preferred and not preferred. But the thing is, I want to be in the preference area as much as I can throughout my life. So for me, slipping into neutral is slipping in away from the preferred area, from the place I want to be.
Okay. I mean, I definitely hear what you're saying. I definitely understand it. And you are definitely choosing to use a word differently than how I choose it. I like neutral. Neutral works for me.
Okay.
You might even say it has a preferred value.
Well, all right. If you prefer it, then it's preferred. That's true.
Well, because when I was really disliking a relationship and there was lots of resistance, and I did some personal work and I adjusted my vibrational frequency, my intention is to no longer feel the things that were painful to me, no longer to feel, ugh. And when all of a sudden there's no more ugh, and it's just kind of like humming along, there was nothing negative that entered the picture. That to me, that is a neutral zone. It doesn't mean that the relationship has now all of a sudden become best buddies, but it's like whatever circumstances take place between you and the other person that used to be always really contentious, now you can stand to be in the same room and you don't like hate those people anymore, and you're like, they're just people. They might be cousins, and you don't have to interact with them, but they're there and they don't bother you anymore. That's neutral to me.
Okay.
So, well, is that preferred to you?
No, I don't prefer that. I mean, I prefer it to being in the negative, in the definitely strongly not preferred range. But I prefer even more to be in the true preference range, like the love range, the happy, the joy, the contentment, all the positives as they're so called. I want to be in that preference range. That's where I want to live.
So you're reaching for something more than in a way than I am, because I don't see that I'm going to be a match for everybody, and I don't need to be a match for everybody. So if let's say I go to a family gathering and there's somebody there that I know that we see things so differently, I don't even have a desire or preference necessarily to be bosom buddies where like we're fabulous pals. I just want to be able to be in the same room without there being anything ugly. And I want to be able to say, hey, so how are you doing? And it might be a non-eventful conversation. I wouldn't call that pleasant. I wouldn't call it like, oh, wow, that was so fun. I can't wait to see him again. But I might just say, hey, it was good. It was okay. It just, there was definitely nothing negative anymore, and that was a good thing. But so I guess maybe for me, my preference is just I want to come to a state of it's acceptable, and then if I choose more, I can. But I'm not always looking for something fabulous.
Well, I guess we all have different preferences. That's really what it comes down to. Your preferences are going to be different from mine, and mine's going to be different from our listeners, and everybody's going to have different preferences, and that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've told this before, but I had a boss once upon a time who he and I just absolutely got along great in the beginning, and then it went south after about a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very aware that his style was not mine. We didn't communicate the same way. We did not have the same values, but we did have to work together. But he, in a lot of ways, sparked so many things like my father used to, and he really represented all these negative things that I had not yet resolved with my father. And so as I poked around at each one of those things that we just were not connecting on well, of course, I was doing this on my own time, just between me and me. I found new ways to look at things. I started to understand what my relationship with my father could have been, and I saw things from a new perspective. And then I noticed when my boss did the same things that used to irritate me, they didn't irritate me anymore. They didn't necessarily make me happy, and I didn't even necessarily agree with his point of view, but I was able to listen to him and move on. And so for me, that was like I came to the point of neutral. And I never really wanted to continue to work with him because there were still so many things that really weren't a match. And because I did change so many things, eventually he moved on and went on to a new role, and we no longer work together. So I would say, as I think about him fondly as the person that he is, but I was thrilled that I got to a point of a neutral state where the things that he said and did that really were contrary to who I am and what's important to me no longer ruffled my feathers.
Well, that's good. I would even submit the idea that you didn't stay in that neutral state. You actually progressed into a more preferred state, or what's often called a positive state, partly because you're a Pollyanna. That's what you do. That's what Pollyannas do. They get positive.
How did I Pollyanna that one? How did I Pollyanna that one?
I can't say exactly, but I am certain that you did. And the way I know that is because you are a positive, upbeat person, and you tend to like your preferences, and you tend to stay there, and you tend to live there, and you'll even, insist on staying there against, foul winds, to create sort of a metaphor there. So I know that you have that as part of who you are. I imagine what happened was that you got into a more positive zone than just neutral. Your vibration changed from his, and that contributed to him not being part of your life anymore.
Well, I look at it from law of attraction. We no longer were a match, where he would say and do things that were very critical in nature.
Yeah.
That mirrored how my father was very critical.
Right.
And when I reframed and looked at the stuff with my dad, I no longer judge my dad as mean and an ogre and how dare he be so critical, because I got some new awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I got some new understanding about how he was raised, and his intent behind the criticalness was often not to be mean, but because he wanted to try to improve circumstances for me. Now, he did it in a very unkind way, and it was that caused me to feel so hurt. And my boss kind of did it sometimes in an unkind way, and I felt hurt. But I realized that the essence behind the criticalness really did have a positive intent. And so I chose to look at it from that perspective. He's not trying to go out of his way to hurt me. And I'm thinking about both my dad and my boss. He wasn't trying to purposely hurt me. He just really wanted to bring what he thought could be improvement, which in my world wasn't. And so I just started to look at it differently. And that's why when he would say things that normally I would have deemed as critical, I'd go, okay, that's his point of view. That's how he looks at this. But I don't have to agree with that. And I don't even have to argue his point. I can just listen to what he says, and at the end go, okay, and then move on. And so,
That's
again,
right.
For me, it's not like I really enjoyed this conversation, but I didn't just endure it either.
No.
I was able to just kind of put my car in neutral and go, I'll just wait until the light turns green and then I'll move on.
Well, you did more than that. You let go of an old tape. Strictly speaking, he really couldn't hurt you. Strictly speaking, you have to in some way choose to feel hurt. He can't actually hurt you. You're the only one who can really do that. So essentially what you were doing is you were changing the way you looked at the situation incrementally until you got to the point where it was no longer hurting. And that process, I believe, actually ended up pushing you into a more positive or preferential zone. And in that preferential zone, your vibration and his just didn't match anymore.
Well, I would say my preferred vibrational zone is to always see things with the eyes of curiosity and not to judge.
Sure.
And I removed my judgment from the situation.
Yeah, which is a good thing. It's a very strong thing.
So if you want to say that I was now moving into my preferred state, okay. I just see that there are, for me, this is funny. So like we used to have we had something in our company where we would forecast whether we thought a contract would renew or not renew. And so we had a system called red, amber, or green, and we would forecast each one. And amber meant, well, there are some signs that it could cancel, but there are some signs that it could renew. And so that was like a neutral place. It was kind of middle of the road, not non-committal either way.
Could have gone either way.
Red and green were, pardon me?
It could have gone either way. Yeah,
where red or green was making a commitment. I'm pretty clear that this one is going to renew. I'm pretty clear this one's going to cancel.
Right.
Well, maybe 2-3 years ago, the company decided that we didn't want the middle of the road anymore. We didn't want the neutral zone. We wanted to either forecast it was canceling or it was renewing, period, end of report. And so the conversation you and I are having right now, I think is exactly that. Where I see red, amber, and green, I see 3 different zones where I'm either all for it, all against it, or I'm somewhere in the middle. And you're seeing it as it's either red or it's green.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
And I kind of take my cue from Abraham on that one, because Abraham is the one that says that there are really only 2 emotions. So I agree. I say, oh, yeah, you're right. There are only 2 emotions, so that's why I'm going to look at it.
And I'm kind of looking at the, and there's probably more emotional names, but they have, on their emotional guidance system, they had it printed out.
Yep.
And I looked at it, and there are 22 different emotions.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is the ones near the top are definitely the ones that they call the positive ones, or the preferred ones.
Yeah.
And the ones at the bottom are definitely in the icky zone,
right?
Or the not
icky
preferred
zone.
However, it's not like it's a clear-cut red, amber, green scenario. It's not like the ones in the middle are even neutral. As a matter of fact, they say very clearly that until you get to a state of hopefulness, which I'm actually looking at my chart right now, hopeful is number 6 from the top. That's the dividing line between the preferred and not preferred, between the positive emotions or negative emotions. And so there's really a smaller band or a smaller range of the preferred vibrations than there are in the not preferred vibrations.
Yeah, Cindy and I were talking about that this morning, about how it's a very, very small number in the preferred vibrationals. And interesting, they don't include contentment in that. Contentment sounds to me more like that neutral space.
Contentment is number 7. It's just below hopeful.
That sounds
now
neutral
here's
to me.
something funny. When I had my meetup group on Law of Attraction, I printed this out and I color coded it red, amber, and green. And the ones that are in the amber state, they're not, you could call them neutral, but they're kind of like the middle zone where they're not really intense, but they're still on the negative side. It's worry, doubt, disappointment, overwhelmment, frustration, pessimism, boredom, contentment. And when you cross over the line of contentment into hopefulness, now you're in the space where Law of Attraction really has like more substance to work with. Right,
because it's a true preferential zone. Yeah.
So in that zone, you have hopeful optimism, positive expectation, solid belief, enthusiasm, passion, joy, appreciation, love, freedom. Yeah.
And it's interesting, too, to hear you describe what's in your amber zone, because for me, my amber zone from this list would be just contentment and boredom. Pessimism on down would be in my not preferred, my red zone list. Yeah. So there's another example of how we look at things differently. Everybody looks at things differently.
We do.
And that's what creates things, that's what makes life interesting. Otherwise, we'd all be the same.
See, I know people who are pessimistic, but but I really look under the hood. So I'm thinking of one person in particular. So he tends to run pessimistic, but his pessimism is about bringing balance and not going too extreme to one side or another. But yet he tends to fall more into the positive than the negative. But his main place of his state of being is in pessimism. And I used to think that was a negative thing until I really got to know him. And I saw how that is what brings him a sense of certainty and peacefulness, that he's not just running nilly-willy, into something positive that maybe had some sand traps that he couldn't see.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the thing
anyway,
the thing I was talking about with Cindy, though, that really caught my attention. You kind of touched on it, but I wanted to really come back to it. There are 6 that we agree are in the preferred range, and there are another, depending on how you want to count it, another 16 that are neutral to negative or neutral to not preferred. And that fact, the fact that there are so few in the preferred range and so many in the not preferred range, I find to be fascinating. And I say it's fascinating because I think it very neatly mirrors the reality that we live with in the default world, so to speak, if you know what I mean. The reality that most people deal with, the reality that shows up in the media and the news and entertainment and politics, the reality that most people who are not into law of attraction experience on a day-to-day basis. There is a very heavy orientation toward the negative side, and I think this list actually reflects that.
Okay.
So, I just find that interesting. To me, that's just another reason why I want to be in the preferred range. It's like, okay, I'm really narrowing down my scope here. That's where I want to be.
So I wonder if that means that if there's only 6 different vibrational stages, there's probably more. This is just, a metaphor that Abraham has used in terms of, here are the positive.
Oh, yeah. And they say themselves that you could make this list a lot of different ways. You could change words out. They say that right in the book. So, yes.
Right. But I wonder if because, like you said, the majority of our society is living more in a default / negative vibrational space, I wonder if that's why we have so many more negative emotional names.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. Whereas as we maybe get more into the positive zone, we will start creating more words, and maybe there'll be more differentiations. So the 6 might become 12. They'll just be like slighter variations between them.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. In fact, I remember when I was first trying this whole idea of using an emotional guidance scale and trying to learn how to incrementally move my set point and so forth. I remember how hard it was to do it. And then I remember also I was trying to come up with the pivots, the pivot messages and how to frame them in words. And I began to realize that in comparison to what I can call the negative namespace or the negative word space, there were large gaps in the positive word space that I just couldn't find words for. And I remember remarking to Louise, there's a huge chunk of the English language that's missing. It's just never been developed or whatever. And I just marveled at that. I for the longest time, I was actually thinking maybe we should start inventing new words just to kind of balance it out.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Let's invent new stuff.
Yeah. Now they do have, they do tend to group words. Like at the very top of the scale, the top vibrational level actually has 5 words in it: joy, appreciation, empowered, freedom, love. So we're kind of top loading it at that point. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot of room for creating more positive words, and I'm all in favor of it. So we have our little lexicon that we're working on. So I'd say let's also make it the preferred and the non-preferred sections of the lexicon. Let's build up the preferred section.
So if love, joy, appreciation, empowerment, and there was one other, if they're all in a very similar vibrational band, because that's how Abraham talks about them, I wonder, because the words are different, if each one has a slight vibrational variation, where it's almost imperceptible, but yet it really is slightly different? I wonder.
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, when Abraham says that they're really just two emotions, I wonder how that factors in. You know, are there major vibrational differences between hopefulness and love? I don't know.
I think there is for me. I can absolutely attest to the difference. Yeah, I remember where I was in my life when I knew that my vibrational set point had finally shifted to hopefulness.
Okay.
And then when it shifted to optimism, there was a very different feeling in my world.
Okay.
And as I kept shifting up, very different place of being. So yeah, to me, hopefulness is what I consider in my life the most negative of the positive emotions that I'm in most of the time. I mean, most of the time I'm higher than hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm only, I'll put it this way, if I'm only feeling hopeful, I know I don't have a solid belief towards something.
True. Right.
So that's really how I can tell. Like, I remember when I just had begun working toward Project X, and I remember feeling hopeful, but I didn't have a solid belief yet worked on because I hadn't thought about enough of the positive aspects for me to have a sense of, yeah, this is going to happen. It was more like I hoped it was going to happen.
Well, then this also leads to another question. If there are significant vibrational differences between hopefulness and love, for instance, or hopefulness and joy, then how do we evaluate what Abraham has said in other places where they say, what you need to do is you need to raise your vibration to about or approximately the same vibration as the thing that you're trying to attract. And that I don't remember the exact word, but it meant like about or approximate. And if it's an about or approximate thing, I wonder how close does it have to be? Is hopeful close enough to joy, for instance, that if you reach the hopeful state and you're trying to attract something into joy, that it's close enough that it can actually attract?
I've heard that. I know what you're talking about, and I know that I've thought that through. And what I found is if I'm at hope and I don't do anything to improve my vibration,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have a lot of intensity toward creating what I want, for me, it doesn't get created.
Okay.
But if I have hope and I'm in hope for a while, and then all of a sudden I just get really intense and make some really strong declarations, and I'm like, I'm going to have this happen one way or another. I'm going for it because I know I deserve it. I know I'm worthy. I know that Source cares about me, and I just really go for it. What I know is that a strong intention with a lot of intensity can trump resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so in hope, there is still some resistance.
Yeah.
But if you've got a ton of intensity towards what you want, you can move it energetically.
Well, I'll tell you something else that I've thought about, and you give me your feedback, what you think about, how accurate or inaccurate it might be. I have the very strong suspicion that while we think of these things at these different levels of vibration and so forth, joy, passion, enthusiasm, optimism, hopefulness, different levels of vibration, I think that what actually likely goes on in the, I don't know what to call it, the non-physical world, I guess, because I almost said the real world. The real world, it has its own baggage attached to it. So the non-physical world, I guess, is the closest I can think of, or the energy world. How's that? In the energy world. So in the energy world, I suspect that there's a great fluidity to all this stuff. And while we think of it as different states, there are actually no states. There are simply points that you kind of pass as you're moving along. But I suspect that there's not a fixed set emotional set point that just is kind of fixed in place. I think it's a fluid point that kind of perhaps averages out to one particular place. But I don't think it's ever stuck in one place. I don't think it's ever steady in one place. I think it's moving all over the place. And that makes it really hard to kind of evaluate all these questions that we're asking.
So are you talking about when we have preferred something and it's in our vortex, our energetic vortex of it's done, it's already complete, it's done, because our inner being is holding fast, holding on to the completeness of that which we prefer. Are you talking about in that state, in that vortex, that there's a fluidity?
No, the fluidity is in our interaction between our physical selves and our inner being, where the emotions take place.
Okay. Well, I guess we always tend to be fluid between the gap, the space between us and our physical self and our non-physical self. That's what the emotions are indicating.
Right. And I'm suggesting that because it's fluid, then it's only slightly meaningful to say that I'm feeling joy or I'm feeling optimism or I'm feeling hopefulness, because it's so fluid, it's actually changing from moment to moment, from split second to split second. So we're basically saying that there's a state there that actually isn't there. There's never really a state there because of the fluidity.
Okay.
And so because of that, we don't really have to worry too much about how close optimism is to joy, for instance. Because if they're fairly close, but they're not really close, they're close enough that they can kind of be communicating. If we're in a this is where words start to fail me. I'm trying to find the right words. If we are in an instance, how about that? If we're in an instance where we're feeling optimism, and the very next instant we could be feeling something higher or lower on the scale, and we're trying to attract something that's in the joy vibration range, and our being in a sense makes contact in the sense of, oh, I see it, 4 o'clock, there it is. Then our fluid vibrational nature, that connection between inner being and physical being, can instantly, in the next instant, zoom up the scale closer to it. And so they actually start becoming more and more the same vibration. Now, did we think of ourselves as shifting instantly from optimism to enthusiasm up to joy? Maybe, maybe not. I'm just saying it's not something that any of those places were fixed places. They weren't like fixed static places. They were places that were so instantaneous that describing it as just optimism, I'm just feeling optimism, does it a disservice. It does us a disservice. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I guess my thought is, I don't think in terms, when I'm living my daily life, I'm not thinking in terms of ever labeling how I feel. I just have an awareness that I feel the way I want to feel, which is pleasant or happy or joyful or well-being or appreciative.
Yeah.
I'm giving it words so we can talk about it,
right.
But I'm not thinking about it in those terms. So what we focus on is going to determine what we're feeling.
True.
And we think lots of thoughts in a given day. We can bump in and out of any range of vibration as we think our thoughts.
Which means, among other things, that if we say that optimism and joy are too far apart to be attractive, what we're kind of doing a disservice to the model, because we're suggesting that that gap is going to remain. And it never remains. It's constantly changing.
Now, when you say optimism and joy and attracted, I didn't understand what that meant.
We were talking before about them being at different vibrational states. Joy being a much higher one, optimism being a much lower one. So they're not the same vibration at all. In fact, you talked about how moving from hopefulness to optimism, you experience that as a significant step upward. Mm-hmm. So that's what I was talking about.
Okay, but when you're talking about this is for what purpose in our development of...
simply to point out, I guess I'm, in a way, I'm reflecting my own personal development over the years, because early on, I did not have any sense that I could move my own emotional set point. It never occurred to me that I was moving it all the time, without even trying to. I thought it was fixed.
So when you talk about a set point, I think of that differently than just moving in a fluidity within the different emotional range. Because to me, a set point is where do you tend to be most of the time. That's a set point.
And my point is where you tend to be most of the time is misleading in the same sense that the word average is misleading. I mean, scientists
how is it misleading?
Well, scientists are always looking for what the average is. But as Sean Aker points out, he's much more interested in knowing what the non-average is, what the abnormal is. Now, is that where most people are at? No, but it's also going to be where he learns how to help people move the average up. He's never going to learn how to do that by studying the average. So focusing on the average is actually misleading. It misleads you in terms of thinking that, well, if I focus on this average, I can learn how to move the average up. No, you can't. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, but I don't know what average has to do with this, with
well,
the emotional guide.
Well, you just described it. You said that the emotional set point represents the average place. I don't know if you used the word average, but I don't remember exactly
what word you used.
It's
where you tend to be at a given time, but we can shift our set points up and down.
And we do normally.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the tide, near an ocean. The tide moves up and down.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can say, at 4 o'clock, it's normally at this level, and at, the opposite 4 o'clock, it's at this level.
Right.
So there are natural ebbs and flows. But I would say, let me use, to kind of define how I'm talking about set point, I would say I remember distinctly, probably around 2001, 2002, taking stock of what emotional feelings I experienced most of the time. And I would say most of the time I was in frustration and disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time. Did it mean sometimes I felt elation, joy, and laughed a lot? Sure. But you know what? After the laughter subsided, somehow I would move back into frustration and disappointment. Sometimes I moved really low and got seethingly angry and revengeful and hateful. But once those emotions passed, I buoyed back up to frustration and disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
So I was very aware that my set point was in the zone of frustration and disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at the person I went through the course with, they took stock of their life and they were in anger most of the time. And so if you wanted to play comparison on the chart, they were in a lower vibration than I was, which is why sometimes being with them was frustrating because I got pulled down to their level. And sometimes it was really nice for them to be with me because I pulled them up.
Right.
So we didn't intend for our set points to be there for the rest of our life. That was just a really good day that we took stock of where we were. It was a point of reference. And then we looked at where we wanted to go. And he knew he wanted to move out of anger up, whatever that meant to him.
Mm-hmm.
He just didn't want to live in that place because he didn't feel
Sure.
good.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to live in frustration and disappointment for the rest of my life, even though I'd been there for probably 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to be very mindful and acknowledging when I noticed a shift. And I even remember when I hit the point of boredom and thinking, oh my God, I am so bored in my life. And then when I heard myself say that, I got really excited.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized I had been bored for so long now. And in the achievement, if you will, of boredom, I had actually disembarked from frustration and disappointment. I wasn't in frustration and disappointment hardly ever anymore.
Which is good.
Most of the time I was just bored.
Which is higher on the scale.
So when I acknowledged that, I went, oh, we want more because boredom is good because it's definitely an improvement over frustration and disappointment, but it's just plain boring.
That's
I
right.
want more out of life. So then I remember when I got to contentment. And I went, well, I'm not bored because there's a little bit of discontent for me in boredom. I was at content where for me, it was kind of neutral. Go back to that word. It was kind of neutral. It wasn't positive. It wasn't negative. It was just kind of like I was just there. And I remember thinking, I don't think I want to stay here for too long. But after being in frustration and disappointment for so many decades, I don't mind hanging out here for a while. And again, I had uproariously happy things in my life and some really seething, horrible stuff in my life. But most of the time when those temporal emotions kind of moved their way out and they took their course and they were gone, I buoyed back to contentment. And I noticed that's where I tended to stay. Like if I didn't introduce anything new, that's where I would be.
Mm-hmm.
I was just content. And then I want to reach for more. And then I heard Abraham talking about when you cross into hopefulness, you've crossed into a whole nother arena, like the tipping point. And I went, that's where I want.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember when I got to hopeful. And I'm sharing this because for some people, they don't have any real acknowledgement or awareness of this. They just go through these shifts because they are changing how they're thinking. Now, because I had this emotional scale, I paid attention. And now I'd say, I'm not staring at my thing right now, but I'm definitely in the middle of the preference zone. That's kind of where I buoy most of the time, where you would call me the Pollyanna.
Right.
Which I've actually always been a Pollyanna. I just didn't always have the vibration of a Pollyanna.
Mm-hmm. But that was where your normal tendency would have taken you eventually.
I don't know. Probably not. Not if I didn't change my thinking.
Oh, it only happened because you did it deliberately. Okay, well, that's good.
Oh, I was because I was a Pollyanna since I was a kid. But I was pretty not happy a lot of the time because I focused on some really unpleasant things and focused on them over and over and over and over and over. And I didn't know I didn't know to not focus on them. It's like I didn't even realize I had a choice to not focus on certain things. It was just so by default and so habitual that I focused on negative things.
Then I have to ask whether or not you were really a Pollyanna at that point. But we may be mincing words and getting semantic here. But
I think I was, because then something would distract me from my negative thinking, and then I'd kind of go back to thinking more optimistically.
Okay.
But to me, a set point is all about where do you live most of the time? What's your vibrational countenance most of the time? Where do you buoy to when you're kind of in a neutral zone? When you're not like really harboring any thoughts one way or another, where do you tend to live?
Okay. Well, going back to where I was trying to take it, I was going back to my earliest days of learning how to understand and then apply the emotional guidance scale. And at that time, I was trying to take stock of what my own emotional set point was. And first of all, being confused because I couldn't seem to identify what it was. It seemed to be all over the place. But if I averaged it out, like took the norm, like you said, what was my normal state, which is another word for average. So my average state.
So it's not to confuse it. I don't think of it as average, and I don't think of it as normal.
Oh, I thought you described it as the norm.
Well, where you land. Where do you land most of the time?
That's not the norm?
Not necessarily. I don't know.
I thought that was the definition of a norm.
Okay, so if you were to take your temperature and, the quote, the norm is 98.6. And if I take my temperature multiple times a day over the course of like a year, and I notice that I range between 98.3 and 98.5, we could take an average, because but let's say we took 1,000 different readings, and most of them, let's say 90% of them were at 98.5. Then we would say that that's kind of the norm, or the average. Mm-hmm. I could see that. Yeah. But I like to think of it as, well, I hate the word average. It's just my own personal thing. Because I could be wrong, but it's like when you think of an average, to me, that's a mathematical number.
Well, so is norm, actually.
Yeah, which is why I was taking those out. It's like, where do you bounce back to? Where do you land? I don't know. Somehow, don't ask me why, but somehow that feels more what I'm really trying to.
Let me see if I can try to come at this another way then. The idea that there is a place that we buoy to, that we bounce back to. I'm going to try to avoid any mathematical concepts here, okay?
Okay.
So the idea that we have a place that we buoy to is the idea that I'm taking issue with. And I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm simply saying it causes issues. And the issues that it causes have to do with us placing our own limitations on our own minds by buying into that buoyness. So, for instance, if I, at that time, early on, if I had picked where I was going to be on the scale, I probably would have picked somewhere between, let's see, this would have been about 2009, something like that. So around 2008, 2009, I would have been around worry down to perhaps discouragement or anger. So I would have been somewhere between 14 and 17 on the scale, okay? And that's, I kind of recall that's what I did. I realized that I was at that point in the scale. I had a little problem with the scale because I would have ranked the different words differently from the way they did. But if I had to pick a point on the scale, I probably would have been in that range. And that exercise actually helped me put a limit on my mind, because that limit was, I'm stuck here. This is where I am. How do I move that? I don't know how to move that. How do I move that? And they say, well, you do it incrementally. And so that's what I end up trying to do. But in the back of my mind, from that point on, it's like, I'm stuck in that range. I'm stuck in that range. I'm stuck in that range. All because bear with me. All because of this idea of a buoy point. And my claim here is that a buoy point is only an indication of what you're focusing on.
Agreed. Chronically or habitually.
It's whatever you're focusing on, whether you're doing it chronically, habitually, or just on the spur of the moment. It's whatever you're focusing on.
Okay,
well, wait. I'm not done yet. Let me get there. So if that's true, if it's true that it's what I'm focusing on, then I submit I would have actually been better off not to think in terms of a buoy point or in terms of an emotional set point, but I would have been better off thinking in terms of a place I want to move to.
I agree.
If I had thought of it that way, I think I would have moved quicker, because I would have realized we all bob up and down constantly. None of us are set in any particular range.
Agreed.
And if I had thought of it that way, I think I would have been able to make the move up toward the preference range a lot faster than I did. As it was, it took me 4 or 5 years to move up.
So that scale is not meant to hold you anywhere.
I know.
It's just a reference.
I know. Yeah.
And so what I'm hearing you say is you used it, and you used it in a way that did not serve you.
That's true.
Yeah. When I talk about a set point, I'm talking about where you have gotten, where you can sustain that emotional place of being without much effort.
And I'm suggesting that for me, and perhaps for others, that idea of a set point works against the goal.
So let's change the word set point to sustainable. What level can you sustain without much effort?
Even the idea of sustaining caused me problems. I actually was not able to get consistently up into the preferred range until I let go of the idea of trying to sustain it.
Okay. If that works for you, cool.
Okay.
If that works for others, great.
It just goes to show we're all different. Every one of us is different. Yeah. And we have different ways to deal with these things, different ways to understand them, and it makes a much more interesting life that way, I can tell you that.
Kind of like if I think of monkey bars.
Monkey bars.
And let's say there's like 20 rungs on the monkey bars, and you get to about the 4th or 5th monkey bar, and you start to feel a little bit of fatigue, or your hands start to get a little sweaty and slippery. It's kind of like, you can make it to 5, but it's like, okay, can I get to 6 or 7? And so this is my illustration. So let's say I get to 6 or 7 and then I fatigue and I fall off. Well, then when I want to do it again, I'll go, I know I can make it to 7. Let's do it again. So then I start over and I start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I've noticed that I didn't get fatigued at 5. Now I got fatigued at 7. So I'm like, I'm going to reach a little bit more and I'm going to do it. And I make it to 10 before I fall off. In my mind, I've shifted my sustainability point. I've shifted my set point. It's like I can go farther each time. I'm seeing progress. And that's all it is. It's really just a marker of progress. And for me, I love knowing when I can sustain something. So like when I think about the scale, the bathroom scale and weight, I remember when I had lost 60 pounds. And, you know, to me, just because of how food is and bodies are, we always are varying probably anywhere from, 2 to 5 pounds, from day to day. I think that's normal for most people. Well, 5 pounds might be a lot. But I know I vary from day to day 2 pounds easily. Mm-hmm. But when I got from, I don't even want to use my real weight, so I'm going to talk about somebody who starts out at 180 pounds, okay, and they get down to 120, yeah, and now they're at a place where they look great, they feel great. If they go up to 122, it doesn't feel like the end of the world because that person their body has figured out how to get down into the 120s anyway. Mm-hmm. You're not at 180 anymore. You're not even at 170. But I remember I've been on millions of diets. And, if I would lose 20 pounds, and let's say I was in the 160 range, and I was really excited because I was in the 160. And if I gained a couple pounds or lost a couple pounds, it was no big deal. But when the scale started creeping up and I'd hit 170, it's like I was no longer sustaining the low 160s.
Right.
My body had adapted, and now it was more sustainable in the high 160s because it was tipping to 170. And that tells me something has happened. There has been an incremental change that now lands me in this set point in the high 160s instead of the low 160s. Mm-hmm. That's how I think of set point. And so to me, it's like if I'm trying to go down the scale, I get really excited when I'm out of the 170s because now I'm in the 160s. Mm-hmm. Then if I go down to the 150s, I'm even more excited because my body is no longer sustaining the 160 numbers. It likes the 150 numbers. And it just kind of shows me where I am. So if I overeat one day, I might see an extra couple pounds on the scale. But if I go back to normal, it'll drop back down to 150 again. It's like, yay, this is good because that's what my body has found as its natural set point. Because our metabolisms all have natural set points. At least that's my understanding. And so that's how I think about it in terms of emotional stuff as well. It's like, where have our thoughts started to congregate on a habitual level to allow us to vibrate at a certain space without you having to do a whole lot of effort, without you having to diet with your thinking, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I follow what you're saying. I think your analogy, the weight analogy to the guidance scale, is an interesting analogy for a number of reasons. One thing that really captures my attention is if you're talking about somebody, presumably a female, who's weighing in the 120, 125 range, there are going to be some of them who are scale watchers, but there are going to be an awful lot of them who don't pay any attention to the scale at all. A few pounds one way or another, they just don't even notice it. It's not something that's part of their awareness. Whereas you are very aware of that scale. And I'm wondering, is that awareness holding you back at all?
Well, if it's not the scale, you'd notice it in how your clothes fit.
Well, true. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to keep going because now I think this has gotten really juicy. But you know what? We've run out of time.
We have. We're way over time. We got to draw close to it. But it's been great. Thank you so much for doing it. And let's do it again tomorrow. What do you say?
Let's do it.
All right. We'll see you all next time as well here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye now.